everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And today I'm joined once again by writer Douglas Skelton. Hello, Douglas.
Hi there, how you doing?
Really good, thanks. And we're here to talk about the latest Rebecca Connolly thriller, The Hollow Mountain, although I'm sure we'll touch on other things as well. Before we talk about The Hollow Mountain, can you tell us about the Rebecca Connolly thrillers and why you were inspired to write them?
Well, I've been writing since the early 90s. I started off, as you know, in non-fiction. And when I moved into fiction, I thought, I want to challenge myself as I go along. So the first series that I did was the Davy McCall series, which was gritty, Glasgow, underworld. Pretty tough, pretty dark. Then I moved on to Dominic Quest and did a couple of them, and they were lighter. They were, far more fantastic, if you like, purposely so.
They were I loved them. They were very much kind of Glasgow gumshoe, almost Sam Spade.
I really enjoyed writing Dominic Quest. And then the next thing I did was a New York set chase thriller, which was supposed to kick off a new series, but it didn't sell, so it didn't.
That's
so it's a standalone. And then after that, I thought, well, what can I do next? Each time I was doing something different to really challenge myself and push what I could do. So I thought, well, can I write something from the point of view largely of a 20-something female, because I'm not 20-something and I'm not female. And can I do something again that's not set in Glasgow or the Central Belt? So I came up with Rebecca. She's a journalist. I was a journalist. She works in local weekly newspapers. I worked in local weekly newspapers. So I was on firm ground there. I knew the way things were going with that particular side of the press, which I could filter into it. And I set them in Inverness and the West Highlands. Although the first one, Thunder Bay, for that I invented an island called Stirram, because I wanted to have all sorts of things going on there, and I couldn't make it a real island because the local community would be coming after me with pitchforks probably. So I invented Stirram and picked places, locations from islands and the mainland that I wanted, and put it all into this fictional landmass. And that's how Rebecca came about. And
I was going to ask you about setting them in and around Inverness, but you kind of answered that. You wanted to kind of break out of Glasgow, and I mean, there have been crime series set elsewhere, but I can't think of another one in Inverness. Has there been?
Yeah, there have been. I think Margaret Kirk's series was set in Inverness, and I think there have been others. Right. But it's not as well. Those mean streets are not as well trodden as the Glasgow and Edinburgh one. Let's put it that way.
And The Hollow Mountain, though, is very much a Glasgow novel. So why did you return, if I can put it that way?
Yeah, well, Rebecca's from Glasgow. Yeah. And this is the first time, this is the sixth book in the series, and this is the first time she's actually come back to Glasgow. And I thought, it's time to bring her back. I just wanted to bring her back. The storyline lent itself to that, the way that I envisaged it going. I thought, well, that does lead to... I could easily have set it in Inverness. Yeah. Because it's a dual timeline, I could have had Alice, who's the person who brings the story to Rebecca, and her boss Elspeth. I could have had her in Inverness. But no, I wanted to come back to Glasgow. I thought it was time for me to come back, particularly because my other series is nothing to do with Glasgow or really Scotland.
Yes, which we will talk about as well. Because I wondered whether you wanted to revisit these streets after a time not kind of writing about them.
Yes, because I'm a Glaswegian, and it's been a few years since I've written about it. You're exactly right. And I did want to come back, and I wanted to have Rebecca commenting on some of the changes.
I wondered about that as well. What were the changes that you kind of noticed when writing?
In the city centre in particular. And it's not a big thing, but it's there at the beginning. Yeah. Before the plot actually kicks in. Yeah. And it is a thriller, so the plot has got to kick in, then you've got to follow that. But she goes out to Largs, and she goes out to Loch Awe.
Yes.
So it's not completely in Glasgow.
No, it's not, but it's interesting because it does visit different places, which, I mean, you're in the West End as well.
That's right.
And there's just things in it, I think, I was wondering how you felt. Did it make you look in the city and see these changes that you might not otherwise? Because I think when you're not a writer, sometimes we just, walk through and we don't really notice. But you maybe with your writer's eye.
I did. It was Queen Street Station that kicked it off with me, because I was picking up one night my partner Sarah, who'd coming back from Edinburgh, and I was standing in the station, and I had this flashback to the way Queen Street Station used to be. And I thought, what a change that this is. Even Central Station has changed quite a bit, although it's still pretty recognisable. But I think Queen Street Station, to me, has completely changed. Yeah. It is not the way it used to be. No. And I'm not saying it was better the way it used to be, not at all. But I had Rebecca commenting on this, because she comes in there on the train, and she looks at this concourse, and then she goes out into George Square.
Somewhere else that's changed.
Which is somewhere else that has changed. And then she goes to Princes Square, which would have been there when she was younger, before she left Glasgow. But this is the first time I've taken her there. So I wanted to talk about all this, and the buskers, and the Duke of Wellington statue. And the fact that there is no traffic. When she sees it, there's no traffic cone on the Duke's head, and she comments on this, and she talks about some crime writer having tweeted the day before that this, I was that crime writer, because one day I'd been in and I noticed there was no traffic cone, and I took a photograph and saying, what's wrong with this? And I got something like 250,000 views on that single tweet, which absolutely stunned me. I can tweet about my books, and you're barely scraping into the hundreds sometimes. But then suddenly I post this picture of a statue with no traffic cone in its head, and I've got over 250,000. That's
incredible.
It was amazing.
It shows you what a brand it is, and
it really is. It really is.
I think you can get the enjoyment of revisiting these places as you read it. One of the plots is around the Cruachan project and the Tunnel Tigers. Yeah. Now, can you talk a bit about that? And is it real? Is it based on something real? What's the story behind it?
The whole Cruachan project obviously is real. This was a massive infrastructure work that was conducted from the late 40s into the early 60s and it was to bring hydroelectricity to the Highlands. And it wasn't just around Loch Awe and Cruachan, it was Pitlochry, it was the Highlands, there was all sorts of things going on. And you had these guys called the Tunnel Tigers. Now these were, a lot of them were ex-servicemen, a lot of them came from Ireland, a lot of them came from the continent, England as well as Scotland. And these were the guys who basically blew the hell out of everything to make way for the power station, for the dams, for all the pipe work that we don't see that will be there. It was dangerous work, but it was really well paid. And what you had was, from what the accounts I've read, is a kind of Wild West situation there, because you had all these men coming into the Highlands and into various areas, and they were housed in camps, they were housed in local houses, there was all sorts of things going on, but certainly had these camps. And of course, when you've got all these men, and a lot of them well paid, come the weekend, passions would rise, let's say. So there was a certain amount of trouble. I'm not saying it was like Deadwood, but
kind of like Aberdeen when the shifts change.
Maybe, yeah. So I found out about the Tunnel Tigers when I did this small kind of gift book called Amazing and Extraordinary Scotland. I was commissioned to do that.
Right.
And basically it's a fact book about Scotland, but it's told in a fun way. And that's when I discovered this story about the Cruachan power station and the Tunnel Tigers, and I was just fascinated by it. So I did more reading for it, and eventually I thought, well, I want to write about this, and that's how the sixth Rebecca Connolly novel came about. I wanted to write about the Tunnel Tigers in a way, put them into a thriller situation.
And how do they fit, without getting into the way, how do they fit into the Hollow Mountain?
Well, in the story, we find out about the Tunnel Tigers through the account of Alice Larkin, who is, in my story, a legendary female journalist who became the anchor of news programs on TV. She's elderly now. She's very, very ill, but she has a story to tell, and she talks about the murder that never was. And she's written her account of what happened in the early 1960s in that area, and she gives it to Rebecca and Elspeth, but she gives them in installments.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah, it was like a part work she was giving them, because she wanted them to read that, make up their own mind, and maybe do their own investigating based on what they were reading. The final part she held back until the very, very end. I suppose, it's a device. It's a storytelling device. But she knows what happened. She knows who was guilty. And eventually all is revealed, obviously. But along the way, Rebecca finds that there is a connection, albeit tenuous, to her late father and his past. And both she and Elspeth find themselves in some danger from an old enemy.
Yeah, there's great characters. Alice is a fantastic character. I was trying to work out what might have been there, who might have been the influences, but almost like a kind of privileged, upbringing from another time. It seems like that kind of character maybe does exist these days, but it's a really interesting character. But that device that you had, I was wondering, do you come up with something like that beforehand? Do you think that's how I'm going to tell this story? Because we should say that, we get to read the next bit of Alice's journals as Rebecca gets to read them as well. So it's as it's unfolding for her, it's unfolding for the reader as well.
That's right.
Is that something that you think, this is something I'm going to use to tell this, or does that come with the writing?
Alistair, you're giving me credit for planning there. And that, I think I've said to you before. I'm giving you the opportunity to do so. I never know how I'm going to tell the story until I actually start telling it. So you're right. It was as I started to write it. And I thought, this is...
You kind of punch the air and go, this is really good.
It's a curious way to write, and it's not something that I recommend to anybody. But I just start and see where it's going. And I had no idea. All I knew is I wanted to tell a story that involved the tunnel tigers, or at least one of them anyway, and talked about this massive and very, very complex scheme to bring hydroelectricity to the Highlands. That was as far as I thought, and obviously I wanted Rebecca to be involved, so I hit on the idea that she was coming back to Glasgow to be interviewed for this Netflix documentary based on one of the other cases, other stories that she's worked on. That Elspeth would be there, because Elspeth, we've already established, writes books based on the stories that Rebecca's on. It's kind of meta in a way. So it's as if Elspeth's writing my books.
Yes.
So I knew I wanted to do that. I then started doing the introduction, which was Alice's introduction. And that then lent itself to, when I did that, I thought, well, I could actually do this through the book. And it really was as vague and as haphazard as that. I didn't know. I talked about the murder that never was. Alice mentions that. I didn't even know what it was at the time. And I build as I go. And my main impulse when I'm writing is to get to the end of a first draft. And that way I've got from A to Z, and I can go back and retrofit and fix and add and take away, whatever it is I need to do, which all other writers probably do. But no, there's absolutely no planning involved. There is research, but no planning.
So the only person who knew the truth about the murder was Alice.
Yes.
And you didn't even know that, but
I had no idea.
It's so interesting, and it just makes me think that you never thought of writing these under the pseudonym Elspeth That would have been another trick.
But you see, that would have been planning again, because when I started writing them, I didn't know I was going to be having a Elspeth McTaggart writing books.
Yeah, of course. It's a good idea, though. And talking about the other characters, over the series, you built up a strong cast of characters, many of whom return to, even if it's just on the end of a phone and things like that.
Yeah.
Once you've established that kind of cast, if you like, does that extend your options in terms of story? Does that mean really it's almost limitless, because you can take any one of them and have Rebecca following up something that they're doing?
Yes, I mean, when you've got a large ensemble, and it's not that large, but it's fairly large. You have Elspeth, you have Rebecca's friends Chaz and Alan. You've got Val Roach, the police officer. You've got Bill Sawyer, the former police officer who has been in it from the beginning. So you have all of these characters. There's now Stephen as well, who Rebecca's met, a lawyer who Rebecca is stepping out with. So you have all of these characters, and they can all bring something different. And as you say, some of them might just be on the end of a phone. Yeah.
But you're always pleased I'm always pleased anyway that they're there. They're back. And when something terrible happens to them, you're really kind of caring,
Yeah. So it does give you the opportunity, but also gives you the opportunity to have characters who can do things that Rebecca can't. So Rebecca, I think, we talked about the Dominic Quest and even the Davy McCall novels, and the Jonas Flint novels. Now, I think you will know that my tendency is to kick the door in. Rebecca can't do that. She wouldn't do that. She's not that character. But Bill Sawyer would. Yeah. So he'll do things like that. You've got Val Roach, who can circumvent a lot of characters and a lot of events that Rebecca can't as a journalist. But Val Roach, being I think she's a DCI, she can. So she has access to that. So you have these characters who can do things that Rebecca can't, but still feeding into Rebecca because she's the central character.
If my memory's right, over the series, Rebecca has become more collegiate, if you like, in that sense, because at the beginning it was no, I have to do it this way and my way, and it's a tough business anyway, and yet she's let people in over the series, and now she's got this coterie of people that she really trusts in her lives.
Yeah, she's learned that she's grown over the 6 books, and she's come to depend on people. As she's met them, because at the beginning the only one that she would have known was Elspeth, who gave her first job in this fictional newspaper in Inverness, but was not her editor when Thunder Bay opens. So she's met all these people, and they've become part of her life and become part of her team, if you like. And she's opened up a bit. I think at the beginning she was very closed in.
That's right, that's what I remember.
She had a lot of problems. She had a lot of darkness. She still does to an extent, but she's lighter now. And
are shared, their burdens are shared.
They are to an extent, not all of them.
No.
In fact, I was writing the 7th this morning, and there was one of the things that happened in her past that the reader knows about, that nobody else knows about, that she's still not told anybody. I think she's grown as a character. She's a lot more relaxed in a lot of ways, but still very tight. And she's there's a thread of melancholy in Rebecca that runs very, very deep, and she can't seem to shake it off. It doesn't matter how happy she is, there's always something there that's holding her back. And it's, you feel as if, sometimes I feel as, for goodness sake, Rebecca, will you just lighten up? But that's her character. And she does feel guilt about it, and she'll say things and do things that, in anybody else, they might say, well, she's not a very nice person, but because the reader knows that she really, really regrets saying these things or doing these things, she beats herself up quite a bit. That hopefully, she is sympathetic, but she just needs to break through this.
And you mentioned that there is danger, as you would expect, and there's also that links back to her father, who was in the police, wasn't he? Is that right?
Yes.
And I was, and with criminal activity, and I know you've written non-fiction about true crime and things like that in the past. I was wondering, because Scotland, increasingly I find when is a small country in all sorts of ways, so you make connections in the book world, I'm sure you have, that you think, oh, that person knows that person. It's the same in the music, it's the same, it seems to me, in nearly all areas of life. Is it like that in crime?
Yes.
That something that happens in Inverness will have have connections in Glasgow, or and the police as well will be connected in that.
Yeah, I'm taking a certain amount of license, obviously, but yes, the there can be links, intercity links, to use an old British rail phrase, between the various places, particularly in the criminal world, because in the earlier books you had the Glasgow gangsters trying to move in on the drug scene in Inverness, and the links with gangs, with criminals up there, and yes, I think that is possible. I'm not saying it has happened.
No,
I don't know, but I think it's entirely plausible.
Yeah,
that there would be that kind of outward thinking on behalf of the Glasgow criminals.
And just going back to what you said about the inspiration for the Hollow Mountain and how it was the Tunnel Tigers and that whole story. Is that the case with every book? Is there some one thing that you think, I want to investigate that a bit further? Does the non-fiction writer in you kind of think, I'm going to use that as a basis?
Yeah, with the Rebeccas, there's generally a connection to something in Scottish history or Scottish culture or mythology or something there. Again, it may just be a device to hang the story on, but there is a connection. In the second one, The Blood is Still, it was Culloden, because there was a body found on Culloden battlefield in period Highland dress with a claymore through his chest, and that's what kicks the story off. There's a film being made about Culloden, and it could be connected to that. There's another death in the book where a man is killed and left in the graveyard of the old High Kirk, again linked to the aftermath of Culloden. In A Rattle of Bones, it referred back to the trial and execution of James of the Glens, James Stewart, for the murder of the Red Fox. And there was a modern day case that kind of mirrored that, particularly as the accused or the convicted person was called James Stewart. So where demons hide, there was a suggestion of witchcraft and magic, and the initial death in that was inspired by the story of Nora Fornario on Iona, who died in similar circumstances in the 1920s. So I kind of took that and put my spin on it. So there's always been something. Children of the Mist, it was the area around Kinlochranach, which is a place I love, and the McGregor clan, who were the Children of the Mist. So we talked about that and the various things there. And so in this, it happened to be the Tunnel Tigers and the Crooken Project. So it was a bit more up to date than normal.
And kind of linked to that, I do enjoy your cultural references. I think, like for instance, this time you've got Star Trek versus Deep Space Nine, Springbank whiskey. They enjoy the details and kind of getting them right, because they seem, I don't think these are just thrown away. I think you really think about, that's the right reference for
I like
that character's mouth, because often, you think,
I like to do things like that. That brings me pleasure, just dropping these things in, and particularly the well-known crime author who told Rebecca about the Springbank whiskey, who will remain nameless because he doesn't need to sell any more books, and I'm certainly not going to help Denzel Myrick sell more books. But
he speaks very highly of you as well.
So I do enjoy these things. I've actually forgotten. Somebody else mentioned the Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and I've forgotten what it was I said in the book. I'll need to go and look at it.
It was to do with certain characters who
was it? Right.
Are in. They get the wrong series, I think.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I can go straight to it.
No.
Here we go. It's a play on Kardashians and Kardashians who were aliens in Star Trek.
Yes, that's right.
And although used more extensively in Deep Space Nine, I did enjoy it. Being a Trekkie myself and a Trekker, I did enjoy that. It's something I think about all your novels that I've read. That you just seem to really enjoy writing. I mean, that might sound like an obvious thing, but I don't think it is, because I was talking to another writer who said, I didn't enjoy writing this novel at all. No. But it seems to me you do.
I don't.
You don't?
No.
Oh, there you go. That's so interesting.
I always use the Dorothy Parker quote, which was, I don't like writing, I like having written. And the thing about writing is it's like an illness. It's an obsession, a compulsion that you've got to do it, and when you're not doing it, you feel guilty that you're not doing it, and you dread doing it. And personally, I'll put off doing it.
Right.
I've got to do this, I've got to do that, and then finally I'll sit down and start banging out some words, which quite often I refer as, the approach to making spaghetti, when you take it out the pot and you throw it in the wall, and whatever sticks, that's it. And it's the same with words. Whatever sticks, that stays. So no, it's the actual physical act of writing. Generally, I don't enjoy. There are bits that I enjoy. I like dropping these bits in, and I like doing the fun bits. But no, it's not something that I would say that I enjoy. It's something that I've got to do. It's
very interesting, because the other writer who said, I really didn't enjoy this, has also got a journalist's background.
Right.
I think that's quite interesting in itself. But, so, yeah, do you enjoy the editing process?
Yeah, I don't mind the editing process,
so
actually.
It's getting the words
it's getting that first draft. That is the bit you go, I've got to get these words out. I'm going to get my 2,000 or 3,000 words out today, and I've only done 15. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's that's the bit. But once I've got my A to Z, once I've got my map and the structure of it, the spine of it, I quite like going in and fixing it.
Yes.
Because that's, to me, is easier. You know what's not working. You know what you need to work on, what is working, and you just need to strengthen that a bit. You say, well, that can move there, and I can fix, tweak that bit of dialogue. I can drop this reference into Star Trek, and so that bit actually I enjoy, and I don't even mind doing the editing process when it comes back from the editor, from the publisher. Sometimes I think, oh no, what are they talking about here? But other times I say, well, that's not a bad idea, actually. So I don't even mind that as much as the initial draft, which is just hell, utter hell.
Well, I mean, it almost seems like self-punishment, because let's talk about, you've got 2 series running at the moment.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the Jonas Flint books. Maybe describe them to listeners. You could probably do a better job than
I think I need my head examined. The Jonas Flint books, they're historical thrillers, historical fiction set in the early 1700s during the reign of George I. And Jonas Flint is a Scot. He's from Edinburgh, but he now is based in London. And he's been a soldier. He's a gambler, he's been a thief, he's been a highwayman, but now he works for the Company of Rogues, which is a very, very secret organisation for the Crown, headed by his old commanding officer, Colonel Nathaniel Charters, who has blackmailed him, essentially, into working for this group and working for the nation, as it were, because he holds a capital charge over his head, and if he doesn't do the work, then he'll see that he's arrested for that and duly punished. The fact is that Jonas didn't do that crime, but it doesn't matter. because Charters has the witnesses, he says, that will do it. In book 3, which came out earlier in this year, you actually find out who did do the crime, but it doesn't help Jonas much at all. And basically they are kick the door in thrillers. In fact, when you meet Jonas for the first time in An Honourable Thief, that is exactly what he's doing, is kicking in a door. But they've been described as the 18th century Jack Reacher novels. I don't quite accept that.
Right.
I suppose to an extent.
Right.
But I think Jonas. There's a bit more to Jonas than Jack Reacher. Sorry, Lee Child, if you happen to be listening. But that's me getting a scalp if he ever meets me. So, and I suppose I do enjoy writing them.
Well, I was going to say, I would be stunned if you didn't enjoy writing them, because they're so thrilling to read.
Yeah, there is an enjoyment in writing them, because, again, I don't plan, so I don't know where they're going. Mm-hmm. I've got a rough idea of what he's up to, or what the mission is this time. And I enjoy the language, because I've stylised the language. When I started to write them, I thought, I wonder if I should just modernise the language.
Right.
And then I thought, no, there's no fun in that. So I've kind of stylised it, and I use actual slang. Thieves' cant, it was called, of the period. And the underworld had a way of speaking then, and it was so nobody else knew what they were talking about. And it was based on Romany words and on other things that they brought in. And so I used that quite a bit. But hopefully I explained to the reader what they mean. And I enjoy that, and I just enjoy the way that the people speak in the Jonas Flint books.
It's a great world. I would never have compared them to anything modern. Maybe that says more about me than anything else. But what did inspire them? What made you think, I'm going to write a historical novel with this kind of swashbuckling, and I would describe them as character?
In the, I think it was the third Rebecca novel, it starts off in 1752. Mm-hmm. And it's an English soldier standing on the hill above Ballachulish, where James of the Glens had been executed. And this is 2 years after the execution, and his remains are still hanging on the gibbet. So that opening chapter was set in 1752, and I brought in a lot of the slang for that as well. Now, the author who we mentioned earlier, what's his name? Denzel something, Myrick, I think it was. He phoned me up and he said, really liked that opening chapter. And I said, well, thanks, Denzel, that's kind of. He said, the rest of the book was rotten, but he said, I really liked.
Always a stinging.
You know he was going to say that, didn't he? No, he said, I really liked that opening chapter. I think you should try your hand at an historical book. And I said, Denzel, an awful lot of research needed there. And I said, it's an historical book. It's all very well doing a chapter, but a whole book, you know. And he said, I really think you should do it. And as the conversation went on, and I said, funnily enough, I've had a storyline in my head for about 20 years. And this eventually became An Honourable Thief. And the storyline concerned a will or a document that Queen Anne may or may not have left behind when she died, that may or may not have more or less bequeathed the throne to her half-brother, James Stuart, another James Stuart, who was the old pretender, as he became known. Mm-hmm. So it was when I was writing one of my non-fiction books that I just saw this line about there might have been a document left, but it was never found, probably destroyed if it ever existed. And that stayed with me. And over the years, because I'm not organised, as we've already established, I would mentally add elements to it and do a bit more research and think, maybe someday I'll write that. And so the whole idea of the Company of Rogues came into it. The character of Jonas Flint was added. Set pieces came into my head. I could do that. Other characters popped into my head, and I sort of filed them away. Thought I could bring them back to Edinburgh, because I know a bit about Edinburgh's history, because I've been doing this historical non-fiction. and I could use the Porteous Riot, the basics of the Porteous Riot, and just shift it 20 years to fit my storyline. So all of that was in my head, and I told Denzel that, and he said, no, he said, that's a great idea, you have to write it. And I still said, oh, Denzel, I don't know, it's just an awful lot of work, I'm very lazy. And we share an agent, Joe Bell, and the next thing is he told her. So next time I spoke to her, we discussed whatever it was that she wanted to discuss with me, and then she said, so what's this about, an historical book then? I thought, oh no. So I told her, and she said, well, how long would it take you to write? I said, I don't know, Joe, an awful long time, just, because an awful lot of research and everything else. So she thought I meant about 2 years.
Yeah. So
I sat down and I wrote a first draft in 3 months.
Right.
Because it all just came out of it. It was all there.
And it's all been there.
And I didn't realise just how much of it was there. So it just all dumped onto the computer screen. That wasn't the final book, obviously. That was just the first draft. And so another couple of months of tinkering with it, and I sent it to Jo, and she was really surprised because she really thought it would take about 2 years. And it would be something that I'd go back and forward in doing. So, and that was it. She had a few notes which I worked on, and she put it out, and Canelo wanted it, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Going back to The Honourable Thief and Edinburgh, we spoke earlier about the importance of place, and I mean, there's some great scenes in that book in the Edinburgh of the day. It's a great city for historical fiction because of the wines and just the people and what was going on. It was such a big so it absolutely fits there.
Because you had the Mar Rising. I've set the story against the backdrop of the Mar Rising, and the climactic events take place on a ridge above the Battle of Sheriffmuir. So you've got all of these details and of Edinburgh at the time, and the sights and smells of both Edinburgh and London, which play a major role in the Jonas Flint books. And certainly in London, the criminal underworld mixing real life historical figures in. So you've got Jonathan Wild, who was the self-styled thief taker general. He actually existed.
Right.
You've got Jack Sheppard, although he's very young at this stage, who was a real life thief. You've got Joseph Blueskin Blake, who did exist, and he did work for Jonathan Wild. So Walpole coming into it in I think it's the third one. Sir Isaac Newton makes an appearance and helps Jonas. In the fourth one, which comes out later on in the year, Daniel Defoe plays a major role. Brilliant. So I enjoyed mixing all of this and mixing the real life history with my fiction. And that's what I enjoyed, and also creating these. I think with historical fiction, you can go big, you can really go large, and that's what I've done with a lot of the characters.
Because I was going to ask you if there was specific challenges in writing historical fiction, but maybe there are things that you can do in it that you maybe can't if it was present day.
Yes, there are a lot of things that I probably wouldn't do in a Rebecca.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like going from the David McCall books to the Dominic Quest books, because there were things I could do in a Dominic Quest book that I wouldn't do in a Davy.
Yes.
Because David McCall was very much based in reality. Still thrillers, but very much based in reality. Whereas with Dominic Quest, the ball was up in the slates. And that was the style of the books. They were very light. They were very fast paced. As I said, they were pretty fantastic when you get to the explanation for what's happening, particularly in the Dead Don't Boogie. But I think it fits in the style of the novel. So doing Jonas is kind of like that. I can do things that I wouldn't do in a Rebecca. A lot of things, and because I can have characters that I probably wouldn't have in a Rebecca, and that's where the fun lies for me.
And did you have inspirations kind of non-fiction inspirations for Jonas Flint in that world? Because it reads to me like something you might see on Saturday morning TV when I was young, you know, that
like the flashing blade.
Exactly. Yes. That sort of thing.
Yes.
You know, you can imagine it being made into a
serial. Well, you know that I'm a huge movie fan.
Yes.
And so a lot of there's a lot of Jonas Flint that does come from the movie. James Bond, if you like.
Yeah.
So there's elements of James Bond. There's elements of Harry Palmer. I suppose there are elements of Jack Reacher, although less so. Errol Flynn.
Yes, that's what I was...
So all of that is in there because he is a bit... Ian Rankin, I think, was the first person to use that it was a swashbuckler. And he is right. But again, it is grounded in reality. He's not swinging from ropes or anything like that. Well, not yet. He might in the future. But he's not doing that. But he is grounded in reality. And there is a darkness in Jonas that he has to fight continually. Yeah, but yes, I am influenced in many ways by movies and by the historical works of Dennis Wheatley, by that I read when I was a boy.
Yeah.
A lot of these things all come out in the writing.
And I was wondering, has TV or even film ever come calling?
Yeah, there's always something picking away, but nothing's ever happened, and they lose interest very quickly. Very flighty TV people. So
I think I've said this to you before, but I always thought the Janice run would make a fantastic movie.
Yeah, I think it would as well. Obviously, but no. I mean, unfortunately, that poor book just didn't find its audience.
Yeah.
I don't think people understood what I was doing.
Okay,
and that's probably my fault in the writing. I was putting into prose the 70s and 80s action conspiracy chase thrillers that I really loved, particularly from the 1970s.
Yeah.
So, and yet it was set in the present day. So it's probably my fault that
it was set in New York as well.
It was set in New York.
So maybe people think, oh, Douglas writes in Scotland.
Yeah, and that I don't like.
No.
That's why I don't like tarte noir.
Yeah.
I don't like the phrase tarte noir. I understand as a market, I know how it came about.
Yes.
We all know how it came about, but I understand as a marketing tool that it has its uses. But the problem is then that it limits us, and we then become pigeonholed, and it leads to quotas. So I would prefer that we're just thriller writers, crime writers. That's it. It doesn't matter. A good story is a good story, no matter where it's set.
And we've mentioned already that you've written non-fiction. Is that kind of put aside at the moment?
Yes. I can't see me doing anything more. There's maybe a couple of historical cases that I've got tucked away that I thought, well, maybe one day, but perhaps not.
I've seen you pop up the telly every now and again.
Sorry about that.
No.
There should be a warning. There should be sort of a viewer's warning, a trigger warning. Ahead of these things, like you get. Some faces might be harmful to your health. But yeah, I done a few things like that. But in fact, I turned one down yesterday.
Right. Okay.
I don't want to do anything more on the Ice Cream Wars. I've said everything I've got to say, and unless somebody comes to me with something concrete or something fresh, I'm not going to be talking. It's not fair. It's not fair to everybody involved to just keep going over this.
And was that kind of one of the things with writing any kind of non-fiction, or no, certainly non-fiction related to crime, was that you're dealing with real people rather than the...
Yes, that's why I stopped doing the non-fiction. Well, I didn't stop doing the non-fiction because of that. I stopped doing looking at more recent crimes and started to go back into history, which interested me more because I realised very early on that basically what I was doing was I was turning real life tragedy and people's misery into entertainment. Now, we can dress it up as much as we like. We can sugarcoat it as much as we like, but that is what I was doing, with the exception of Frightener, the Ice Cream Wars book. That had a serious intent. And eventually it just didn't sit well with me. So quite early on in my non-fiction career, I started to move back in time and looked at crimes from early 20th century and further back.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's been a real kind of explosion of interest in true crime, television, podcasts, whatever it might be, and sometimes there is that thing which maybe doesn't sit. I tend not to watch it or listen to them. I'll occasionally pick up a true crime book, and I've appeared a couple of times on David Wilson's programme, and I've read his books, but generally my reading is fiction, and my viewing is all drama. And you've pretty much answered this question anyway, but maybe you can expand. You've said you're already writing the 7th Rebecca Connolly, and you're writing the 4th.
The 4th one's written.
Jonas Flint, it's written. So I was going to ask what you were doing next, but
well, that is what I'm doing next. I'll do the 7th Rebecca, and then as I say, the 4th one's written, and then I've got to have the in fact, we're just announced today, on the day that we're recording, that there's going to be another 3 Jonas Flints.
Right.
So 5 and 6 will be written over the next year or 2.
Oh, fantastic! And Rebecca Connolly as well. Do you know if that's going to?
No, I think this will probably be the last Rebecca.
Oh, right, okay.
The one that I'm writing now.
Interesting to see how you round.
All
these things up. Douglas, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thanks
Always
for having
a pleasure.
me. Yeah, it's great to be here.
And we will be back soon with someone completely different. Cheers.